G'day, welcome to Acrylic Art Alchemy. Today I thought I'd like to show you how to make a little resin beach scene and also how to do resin waves. With any resin that you use, please follow the instructions and wear appropriate protective equipment. I'll be wearing my respirator mask, so unfortunately you'll have to all listen to me during this as I'll be doing a voiceover. The other thing is that I'm actually making 8 of these over the course of a couple of days, so I won't be picking up the same piece each time as I progress through the video. So at first you'll need something to make your scene on or in. I'll be using these clean silicone moulds. You'll need something to mix your resin in and something to stir it with. To begin with, I want to use some casting resin, and I'm using Colour Obsession brand in this video. It's a 1-to-1 ratio mix, as I mentioned before, but of course always follow your instructions. Mix for the recommended amount of time and make sure you scrape the bottom and the sides as you mix. Mine is all mixed up now, and I want to use some fine white sand in at the foreground of my little scene. And I'm just adding about 60 mils of the mixed up resin to about 80 mils of the fine white sand. And when you mix something like sand, you need to mix it in thoroughly. Scrape it around and right down into the corners. Otherwise, when you get near the bottom of your cup, you'll have dry bits of sand. Once I've mixed up the sand, I'm going to decant 3 lots of the clear resin to make up my sea colours. I'm pouring about 60 mils in each cup, which is roughly around 2 ounces. I'll be using some resin paste to make the colours. Today I'm using Just Resin brand, and I have a phthalo blue and a turquoise basic. Whenever you open your jars of resin paste, it's advisable to give them a good stir. The contents inside can separate a little bit. These are highly pigmented resin pastes, and as you can see, I'm scraping off most of the colour of the popsicle stick, and you only need a very small amount. For this project, I'm after transparent colours anyway, so I want to be able to see through the layers that I'm making. So give it a good stir, look for any streaks, which mean that it might not be mixed in, scrape the sides, scrape the bottom. Now I'm adding a bit of that blue into the other 2 cups to give me more of a graduated colour when I add the turquoise. And again, once my jar of turquoise is open, stir well, scrape off the excess. And I want a little tiny drop in my shoreline colour, and the rest goes into the middle. Stir very well again to mix it all in thoroughly, no streaks, and repeat with the shoreline colour. The shoreline colour actually looks dark in this video, but it's quite pale in reality. I'm happy with the colours that I've mixed up, and I think they'll look really well graduated into the shore. And I decided to add a bit of sparkle, like the sun glistening off the water. I'm using A1 Pigments Australia Super Flash Blue, and again, you only need a small amount to get a good result. I'm only adding this to the darker colours, so the deep blue and the deep sea green, turquoise, and then in the shallow water area I'm adding Artisue sparkle powder. Artisue is no longer in production, but you could use glitter or just leave it. Lastly, I have a small amount of clear, which I've also added a bit of Artisue sparkle to, and I just want it to look like shimmering wet sand area in front of the shallow water line. Once I'm happy with how much I've put in, I give everything a thorough stir again, scraping the sides as I go and across the bottom and my stick. I hold it up to the light just to check for the opacity against my popsicle stick. If necessary, this is when I'll add a bit more colour or a bit more powder if I think I need it. But I'm happy with these 3 and how they look. I think they'll give a good graduated colour mix across the ocean into the shoreline. I've lined everything up to one side, ready to use. I'll speed up this next part. To begin with, I add the sand, and I prefer like a cut-off sort of U shape to make like a little bay. Spread it out with my popsicle stick, ensuring that I've left it thick enough for me to put some shells in. And where the water would meet the shoreline, I feather that out a bit with my popsicle stick. I like to do that to give like a shallow sand area that you can see through the water. I prefer to start usually with my darkest colour at the back, away from the sand area, so I don't drip it on anything. So I start with my darkest blue, then the turquoise deep sea colour, and lastly the paler shoreline colour. I blend it a little bit with my stick as I go, and then the clear shimmer I pour up against the blue and over the sand. I'm trying not to get any of the bluey green colour onto the sand area. Lastly, I'm using a little bit more clear just to fill in that area between the water and the sand. And then I'll pop any bubbles using my craft heat gun. It's not as hot as a hardware tool heat gun. Silicone moulds are very easy to burn, and so is resin. Whatever heat source you use, just move it constantly over your piece. Try not to heat up the resin too much, especially near the edges, or it will stick to your silicone mould and it's hard to get it out. The heat helps soften the resin a bit more for blending, and I like to just use my fingers to do that. Now I'm adding my shells, and you can do this pretty well straight after you've poured with casting resin, but other resins you might need to leave it a few hours, otherwise your shells will sink. And lastly, I decide to add a little bit of dried seaweed. I just break off little pieces and press it into my resin sand. And finally, I'll pop any last minute bubbles with my small butane torch set on low, again moving constantly over the area. Once I'm happy with everything, I'll cover it up with a food cover for a couple of hours and come back to it. 4 hours later, and the piece is now quite hard. I'm adding one more layer of clear casting resin to make sure that the surface is even for me to put my waves on. So I've mixed it up exactly the same as I did before. Pop any bubbles with my craft heat gun, moving constantly again. And then I use my fingers to push the softened resin out to the edges of my silicone mould and over the shells. Once I'm happy with it, I'll pop any of the bubbles that are still left with the small butane. I'm doing this at night, so I'm going to cover it overnight and come back to it in the morning. It's the next day now, and the piece is set quite firm. At this stage, I prefer to take my piece out of the mould. I find that the resin can go up the side of the mould, and as it sets, create a hard lip. The lip actually affects your ability to do a good wave. The colours will hit that edge and then push back towards the centre, creating like a feather sort of wing shape. So I take it out and I use a good pair of scissors, and I'll trim the edge down so it's even with the surface of the piece. If by chance it's too thick for me to get off with the scissors, I'll use my Dremel tool and a sanding disc to sand it down. As it's no longer in the mould, I need to protect the back from any drips from when I'm doing my waves. So I cover the entire back with some sharp line tape by Scotch. I prefer it over the frog tape lately. Then I trim it very close to the edge. It's been over 12 hours since I poured the first 2 layers, and I'll be using a different resin for the waves. So I want to create a bit of tooth on the surface for the next layer to stick to. I'm just using some 800 grit wet dry sandpaper that I've wet under the tap. I'm going in a circular motion, only where I want the wave to go, so not over the shell area. Now that I've finished that, there could be fine bits of dust on the surface, so the last thing I do before my wave is give it a good clean. I like to use the isopropyl alcohol and a folded up paper towel. I'll be using just Resin Diamond coat, which is another 1:1 ratio mixed resin for my wave making. I've mixed up my resin as per the instructions, and I've also mixed up my colours. So I've got the phthalo blue, a deep sea turquoise, a shoreline colour, and the clear mixed with a bit of the sparkle. The other thing I have is some just resin titanium white paste mixed into a small bit of resin, and I'll put that aside till 10 minutes before the pot life is up, and in this case that's about an hour, so I set my alarm so I don't forget. It helps the white thicken up. The first thing I do is lay down some clear resin where I want the front of the wave to end, and then I lay my colours down as I did in the first layer that I did. You could use just clear because you will see through it anyway, but I like the look of the layered colours. It gives it sort of a depth and makes it look more realistic to me. So I've put the blue in, now the deep sea turquoise, then I'll do the paler shoreline colour. Again, I'm trying to avoid putting too much of the bluey green colours over the sand area. Adding in the clear with the sparkle, a little bit more of just plain clear on its own, and then I pop any bubbles with my heat gun. Blend it with my fingers. Pop any further bubbles with the butane. Cover it and leave it till my alarm goes off. The alarm has gone off now, and all I do is I use the popsicle stick and I run a line of the white where the clear is on my piece, and I touch the clear as well as touch the bare surface. You start off the piece and you finish off the piece. Next, I used my hardware heat tool. Mine is an Ozito, and it has a wedding cake nozzle attached to the top. You lay your heat gun down almost parallel to the surface. I have the heat set to low, but the airflow set to high, and I'm aiming the airflow just in behind the front of my white line and skimming the white over the other colours that I've laid down. Move your heat gun backwards and forwards a little as you go along the wave line. Then I come back in and I aim it towards the back part, pushing the wave further back. You can pick it up at the sand end and tilt it backwards a little bit, which helps push the wave back a bit further if you like. Next, I use my butane torch, and you move very quickly over the white areas, and this helps break up the white paste and create a lacing wavy effect. This is how it should look. I cover it up and leave it for an hour, and then I'll come back and check it. Sometimes you'll find a bit like this bit on the left that I don't like, and it's still tacky, and you can still wipe some off if you're not happy. So I just wet a baby wipe with some isopropyl alcohol, wrap it around my finger, and slowly wipe off the section I'm not happy with. When you're doing this, you need to move slowly. If you try and go too fast, you'll create like a drag line in the white, and it'll show up when it's fully set. The other thing at this stage is all the resin has thickened a little bit, and if you want to add in a little bit extra white, you can also do that at the moment now too. It won't spread out. It'll just stay where you put it. There's a few other little areas on this wave front that I decide to fix at the same time. There's a little bare patch as well, and sometimes you can fix that, as I'm doing now, by dragging a bit of the white over that bare area and it'll fill it in. Now I'm happy with the wave and I cover it up and wait for it to fully cure. I've decided to add a second and a third wave to my piece. You don't have to, but I like the look of it. And it's the same process as doing your first wave. So you work out where you want your second wave to go, lightly sand it, clean it with the isopropyl alcohol and your paper towel, and then repeat the whole process all over again. And if you want a third wave, you do the same thing. I'll speed this up as you've seen me do it before, but there was one other thing that I forgot to mention at the start, is that you have to be mindful of both the temperature that you're doing your resin in and the humidity. I live in the hot, humid tropics of far north Queensland in Australia, so I do my resining in a spare room with the air conditioning on dry and a temperature of around 25 degrees Celsius. These settings are as per the recommendations for the resin I'm using, and of course just follow the recommendations for whichever resin you use. I'd also like to thank Liz Ankers from Procrastipainter channel, who finally assisted me in being able to do waves at all. My first attempts were quite disastrous, but with Liz's help I could finally do them quite well. And I'll put a link to Liz's channel at top right. Thanks everybody for watching. Please like and subscribe. It'll encourage me to make some more videos. Thank you.